Welcome back to the Now Morning Show. So we're continuing the focus on artificial intelligence, and specifically we're going to be speaking of the development of AI in corporate Trinidad and Tobago. So with us is Larry Hercules, who is going to be just sharing a bit. Now, Larry has numerous hats, including being on the board of advisors, chief executive officer, and so much more. Good morning, Larry, and welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show, Larry. So let's get straight into the conversation, because when we hear artificial intelligence, many people automatically think about chat GPT, cameras, sensors, all these sorts of things. So can you just basically explain to us in very simple terms the difference between generative AI and other types?
Generative AI is a specific branch of AI that is able to generate content, both text as well as media, multimedia, audio, video, etc. And the models we have today have a measure of reasoning ability as well. And so the training of that specific type of AI consists of feeding it a lot of data, up to like 70 billion parameters that gives it the ability to reason.
Just had to let that sink in for a moment. At 70 billion parameters, definitely something to pay attention to. All right, so let's talk about the most perhaps well-known examples of generative AI. Could you share with us?
Yeah, sure. So ChatGPT is a chat application built on one type of large language model called GPT. But there are several large language models that exist today. There's a Claude as a language model, Llama as a language model, etc. And so the large language models, of which GPT is just one type, there are a lot of applications are being built on these LLMs, large language models, and these include video generation. Sora AI is now able to generate film, SORA AI. We have generative models, DALL-E 3, DALLE-3, that is able to generate images. And of course, there's a lot of text-based applications being built on these LLMs as well. And then there's a branch of LLMs that do coding as well as data analytics.
So basically, we have AI for practically everything as of now, and just is going to keep on getting smarter. Let's be real about it. But let's talk about AI and the transformation of the creative sector, particularly graphic design, content creation. You just would have mentioned some of the applications. How is it affecting the industry right now, and what change is it bringing forward?
Typically, we spend a lot of years in the education system gaining some knowledge to be able to reason and do some things. Now we have a large language model being trained on way more words that we have been trained. And so the key skill set now is really the ability to create using an assistant that has way more knowledge than us. And so not just the creative industries, the ability to prompt, which is the ability to ask a question of a language model. Prompt engineering is now a huge career opportunity. The ability to use a language model by asking it specific questions, and there are techniques on prompting. So if you Google few-shot prompting, zero-shot prompting, chain of thought prompting, etc., it's really to bring out the capabilities of the model. Typically, what I've seen while I've been doing some corporate training in organizations is that people use large language models as a way to generate a draft, and their ability to prompt, it's low. So they take the draft and then they take it and revise the draft versus learning to prompt and the first draft becoming 90% of what it should be. And so prompt engineering should be something that is taught at the school level. It's now being put into the university curriculums as well as the corporate environments. And so within specific departments in an organization, not just the content creation piece, right? And content being able to create content calendars, long form, short form, social media content, text, video, audio, etc., but really around software engineering, the ability to write code. And there's coding assistance. An example of that would be Copilot that assists software developers to become way more efficient, as well as strategy and understanding product roadmap, creating product roadmaps as well. So it's not just on the creative marketing side, but really around the generation of content across multiple domains that we have been trained on.
Okay, excellent. So essentially, you've just touched on, of course, also how corporate entities are using AI to be able to enhance their operations in numerous facets, not just marketing. I mean, from what you just said there, we can take away from that that administration is also utilizing AI. But let's go into the ongoing conversation and something that does need to be touched on, which is the ethics behind artificial intelligence, especially when it comes to things such as content creation and creativity, graphic design. What would you say are some of the major ethical concerns, and how are they being dealt with by the industry?
I have a contrarian view because generative AI has been trained on way more content than the human. My contrarian view is humans are more biased than AI. The content being generated by AI depends on the skill of the person asking the question. And so it's a content generation engine that responds to the input of the user versus um, the content generator itself generating consistent content that is what is perceived as bias. And so for me, the definition of bias consists of a specific narrow field of view of opinions based on a limited context of knowledge. And my position is that these large language models possess a greater body of knowledge than most human beings. And the key concept is the human input generating the output.
Okay, thank
Right?
you for sharing that. So
Which
let's
is,
talk about the, just going back to, before we continue with that. Now, ethics is something that needs to be considered regardless, right?
correct.
Is it something that is being touched on by the industry on a large scale, or is it something that is being dealt with on an individual basis per program, per management, and so forth?
Ethics is a thing that still has to be dealt with at a corporate level, regardless of the tool being used, right? And so I advise companies to take a look at even your existing policies that are created by humans and use generative AI to determine where the gaps are in your own ethical processes to improve your ethics. And so the machine itself responds to the input of the user, right? You may ask specific questions and the response may not be what you want it to be, but you're able to ask clarifying questions to get to the output that you do need. And so we have to see the tool as being non-deterministic and getting to specific outputs based on your inputs, right? It's not a calculator where you say 1 and 1 equal 2, right? It's a reasoning machine, and based on your question, the output is being generated, right? And I
Excellent.
think some people are thinking that it's maybe like a search engine. It's not a search engine either. It's a reasoning engine.
Right, correct. Because, of course, as you were speaking, generative by AI, it's something that learns as you go along. The more that you feed it, the more it's going to learn and be able to essentially become an expert in a particular field. Now, let's go to the possibility of risk, especially when it comes to misinformation or copyright. Is this something that should be a concern for entities who are opting to use AI? And if so, how can we mitigate it?
So there's going to have to be a whole framework that's created. If you think about, there's copyright, right, where you own the IP to created work, and there's copyleft, which a good example is open source. And copyright, under copyright, there's a concept of fair use, and fair use, derivative work, and transformative work. Now, my position again is if I'm a music producer and I create a music track, who owns the track? Is it the production software or is it the producer? Right? And so it's just a tool. The feeding of the data that is used to train the models. There's some legal cases that will test the definitions of copyright and fair use, etc. But my position again is that there are other tools being developed to detect the creation of content using generative AI. And so the question of copyright and the definition of copyright as we know it legally was created in a world where generative AI did not exist. There's going to be cases, and it may reach the Supreme Court, where there's going to have to be a new revised definition of what is really copyright and what is the definition of fair use.
It will be interesting to see whether or not that precedent is set throughout the courts in the world. Let's go to another point of conversation that comes up with many when AI is mentioned, which is the fear of job displacement. What is your view on that?
There will be the job displacement. There was a report last January talking about 300 million jobs being lost. I'm actually at a conference where there's a lot of robotics. But my position again is that there needs to be a rapid reskill of workers to be able to leverage new technologies. Just as in the past, the rate of displacement is going to be faster this time. And so the rate at which executives need to act need to be faster. And it's not something that executives can sit and wait to see how things shake out. I'd also implore people to become very proactive in their career and understand how it impacts how you work. If it is your job consists of a series of pre-constructed instructions to be followed, AI can do that. And so your ability to be creative, understand problems at deeper levels, and use the AI to solve these new problems, those are the jobs that will be created and those are the jobs that will exist.
Now, excellent as you mentioned that, because of course, as we do hear many, of course, negate AI when it comes to job displacement, we also see the opportunities for the future. So share with us some of the new career opportunities that are emerging with the advent of AI being incorporated into corporate culture.
The medical field, for example, drug discoveries. There's a slew of medical breakthroughs occurring, cancer screenings, mammograms, etc. So there's going to be a whole slew of medical discoveries that will generate manufacturing jobs, as well as jobs within the supply chain and the delivery network, for example. And with those medical discoveries would mean that there's a prolonged lifespan. So just everyday living, the Maslow's hierarchy, food, clothing, shelter, there'll be more people actually consuming things. There are going to be opportunities in creating and solving problems that took very high-skilled talent. People will be able to solve those problems with AI because the dependency on hiring very high-skilled talent is not going to be there anymore. So there'll be a whole slew of other problems to be solved, but we have to understand the barrier to creating the solutions, whether those solutions are software-driven solutions, AI-driven solutions, will create a new slew of delivery of services. There's going to be a whole vocational movement of 3D printing and the building of construction materials, rendering 3D images and architecture. There's going to be a whole slew of solutions created that will generate another set of jobs at a faster rate, but in the short term, there's going to be some displacement that companies are going to have to navigate through.
And definitely, of course, balance is something that is necessary regardless of what facet of life you are in, including in the digital and technological space. So before we close, for those who've been inspired by this conversation, where would you direct them to go to learn a bit more about generative AI, Larry?
Go to openai.com and their blogs. Go to lifelonglearninglabs.com. I've created a lot of content and I've created a free prompt engineering course that anyone can leverage. Take a look at Facebook research blog. Take a look at Microsoft research blog. And I think it's important for corporate leaders to also understand the capabilities, the new capabilities that exist and how it's going to disrupt their business models. And so subscribing to these blogs is going to be key. On Twitter, there's a lot of emergent technologists on Twitter as well that you're able to follow and understand what is actually happening and what is being created and follow along from there.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Larry, and hoping that you have a wonderful day and looking forward to continuing the conversation on AI as it continues to grow and admittedly be integrated into our society. Have a good one.
Appreciate you. Thank you for having me.